Good evening. This is Kedarji. I am a citizen supporter of community health freedom, and we've got a really great interview in store for you today. I am so happy to have the privilege of interviewing Nurse Michelle Cotterman, who is also the president of Health Freedom Ohio. Michelle, thanks so much for being on
Thank,
with us.
thank you, Kedarji, for inviting me in to have a conversation with you tonight.
I'm so excited. So let's dive right in. So just tell us a little bit about you have a very interesting background and upbringing, I feel. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I was raised in the allopathic healthcare model. And for some of the viewers who may not understand what allopathic means, it's just a fancy word for meaning pharmaceutically driven model of healthcare. And my grandfather was a medical doctor. So we grew up with antibiotics and Tylenol and aspirin and all of the pharmaceutical tools that they have in their tool belt. And I heard things growing up like chiropractors are quacks. And so it was just very divorced from a holistic model. It was something that I didn't even know existed when it came to healthcare. I like many people, assumed that the only model of health was one that came from a bottle and from a pill, and that was the pathway to being well. If you don't feel well, you take a Tylenol. If you have a headache, you take a Tylenol. If you have an infection, you take an antibiotic. There was never any foundation of natural health that was incorporated into my upbringing. I also grew up on things like ramen noodles, Taco Bell, Burger King, McDonald's, potato spuds. I didn't even know that scalloped potatoes didn't come out of a box and little, just add water.
Standard
Different.
American diet, right? SAD.
Standard. Yes, standard American diet for me. So that was kind of how I was raised. But I think a lot of people in my generation were raised in a typical way. It was coming right off the back of, convenience food. Yeah.
So now, why did you go into nursing?
Sure. So I really felt drawn and connected to helping people. I had originally followed in my father's footsteps into accounting and just balancing checkbooks and ledgers and all that. It was just so detached from human connection, working with computers and numbers all day. And so I had gotten into an interim field of healthcare, and I loved it. I loved the connection with people. I loved being able to talk with people every day. I felt like if I could make somebody smile and it helped to make their day brighter, that I was having a really good day. But the most rewarding part of it all, I think, is celebrating with people. They're on their health journey. Meeting them where they're at really is a huge part of what we do as nurses. And it's a complicated field because we're dealing with a lot of emotions, we're dealing with a lot of loss and sadness, but we're also dealing with a lot of joy and recovery. So it's something that I feel very deeply connected with, and something that I feel that is very important in my life, is to be able to help people on a daily basis. And that ultimately is what brought me to the nursing field.
Thank you so much for that. So I know you have a family. How many children do you have?
I have two children. I have a daughter who's 12 and I have a son who is 8. And they are the greatest gifts that I have ever received. Before we're parents, we don't understand the kind of love and commitment that you can have to another person, like you do when you have your own children and you're responsible for teaching them the ways of the world. And in their early years, everything from their nourishment to their emotional needs and everything. So I think being a parent is one of the greatest gifts that we can be given.
And so speaking of your children and understanding your background and the environment in which you grew up in, let's talk about vaccination for a few moments. Were your children vaccinated?
So my daughter was vaccinated at birth with the hepatitis B vaccine. I didn't know any better. Basically, informed consent when it comes to vaccination is them asking you if you have any questions and sign here. I didn't know that I had any questions. In nursing school, we aren't taught about vaccines. We're taught the CDC schedule. We're taught how to administer them, and we're taught that they have saved, millions of lives. We're not taught about adverse reactions. We're not taught about how to assess for an adverse reaction. We're not taught about ingredients, none of that. So I didn't have any questions. So she did receive the hepatitis B vaccine at birth. And then we had selected a family care doctor for the first 2 years of her life, and she didn't push me to vaccinate. She said that she was probably fine. She was being watched by a family member. She wasn't around a lot of other children. So we had delayed the vaccines until she was 2 years old. And at that time, I thought it was important. And so the doctor we had said she doesn't administer them there. So if we want them, we have to hire a pediatrician or go to the health department. So I hired a pediatrician, and we went in, and they gave her 8 vaccines in one visit. And she had an allergic reaction as a result of that. And it was beyond the allergic reaction. That was just the initial point. But from that point on, we were in and out of the pediatrician's office with upper respiratory infections to the point of needing breathing treatments with steroids, multiple rounds of antibiotics. And this was a child whose health I knew for 2 years before that point. And the only thing that had changed was her having that allergic reaction followed by just countless infections of her respiratory system. So I had, over that period of time, decided that we weren't going to do any more vaccines. We were in and out of the office so often that it never came up again because she was always in as a sick visit. And we didn't readdress the vaccines until my son was born. And at his 2-week follow-up, I had already decided that as a parent and a family, that really didn't fit well into our family, and we weren't going to do that. And when the pediatrician asked us about the vaccines for him, and I said, no, we don't need to talk about it because we're not going to do it, he fired me on the spot as a patient. And that was the first time in my life that I realized that there was something bigger going on when it comes to these pharmaceutical products that went beyond just me as a parent making a decision for what was right for my children and my family. I was completely divorced at that point from the system of care that I had grown up in, that I had known my whole life.
And I just want to understand you. I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Your pediatrician, when you insisted you weren't going to vaccinate your son, threw you out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As a mother and your children as patients.
Yeah, they fired us on the spot.
Violating the Hippocratic Oath, in my view, by the way, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was devastating for me at the time because like I said, I grew up in the allopathic system. It was the only system I knew. And and also being a medical professional myself, it was very hard for me to wrap my head around that space of just being kicked out from care, from a provider that we had, well, it had only been a couple years that we had been seeing them. But still, I felt very disenfranchised from that, and I didn't know how I was gonna, recover from that. But it turns out that was a fantastic silver lining for us, because as upsetting as it was, that was literally the segue that led me to holistic health and natural modalities, and ultimately, that I walked away from the allopathic system over. So.
Yeah, so great. So that's perfect timing. So now tell us more about how you got involved in holistic healing, natural health, and homeopathy.
Yes. Because we were fired from the pediatrician, I felt it was incredibly important that we found someone who viewed us as individuals, as unique individuals, and who were going to honor and respect our medical choices, and not, they're not there to tell me per se what to do. They're there as a hired consultant on our health. And if I don't agree with all of the plan 100%, it should be open for discussion, and for us to be able to have a conversation about that, not just putting us out as soon as there was a disagreement. So that I did. I found a medical doctor who introduced me to healing touch and color lamp therapy, homeopathy, herbalism, acupuncture. These were all things that I didn't even know existed. And through that process, I took classes with a homeopath. She flew in from Montana, and I bought my first family kit and started using homeopathy on our family. And I went through the cupboards and threw out all of the pharmaceutical products that we had because they were not necessary any longer. Once I got a real good grasp on homeopathy, it became our primary source of health care in our family. And it's been 8 years now that we've been pharmaceutical free and using homeopathy. So, and it's not the only thing that we've used. I mean, nutrition, I would say, is the biggest foundation for our health. You know, what we eat every day and the clean water that we drink and keep our bodies hydrated, that's primary. If we do have acute situations, then the homeopathy comes in. And my kids know now after 8 years, you know, the power of homeopathy. And when they start to feel a little scratchy throat, they'll ask for a remedy because they know that it's going to give them very swift and comprehensive movement back into balance and a state of health. But that's not the only thing we use. We use some herbal preparations as well. Tea, for example, and some tinctures whenever maybe there's a sore throat or something's a little bit more progressive and we didn't quite catch it fast enough for the homeopathy. Maybe they needed a little extra support. But that's, you know, that's been the real silver lining in that whole entire process. I think if that pediatrician had never fired us as patients, I don't know that I ever would have found these modalities because they would, you know, no one in my life was doing it. It was just a completely new world. And then, let me say too that during that transition from allopathic into holistic health, I felt alone. Nobody who I knew was doing anything remotely holistic. My family thought I was nuts. But I found the Robert Scott Bell Show, and if your viewers have not heard of Robert Scott Bell, I highly recommend you look up his show, Robert Scott Bell Show. He talks a lot about holistic health, homeopathy, terrain theory. So, you know, there's this whole big discussion going on between the germ theory, which means germs cause disease, and terrain theory, which means it's more of the environment and the state of the body and its internal toxicity that will either lead to, you know, disease or robust health. So he's a really great inspiration for me and helped me realize that I had a tribe out there. There weren't people, I wasn't completely alone. There were people out there. I just needed to find my tribe. And I have found my tribe now, and we are growing every single day.
And so your daughter, is she healing from her vaccine injury?
Yeah, it took about 10 months for her to turn around with that. And she hasn't had any more vaccines since then. So she's okay now. She doesn't have any problems. She's had a few other like allergic reactions to some products, but we haven't really been able to pinpoint exactly what it is, just certain brands of lotions and stuff like that on her skin. But there's so many different ingredients that are in vaccines that, you know, any of those manufacturing ingredients could be in the lotions too. Some of the commercials. We make our lotion now, so that we don't have that problem. We use just beeswax and some coconut oil and infused calendulas with sunflower oil and essential oils. So we make our own now, so we don't have to worry about it.
So there is definitely healing after vaccine injury. For sure.
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, I'm connected to the community now, and I see a lot of people who are recovering their children from all kinds of different injuries, from allergies to eczema to autism even, and other neurodevelopmental disorders and seizures and all of that. But they're not doing it through the medical doctors, mind you. They're doing it because they're researching, they're networking, they're finding what works for their child, and they don't stop. You know, that's the love of a parent. You never ever stop trying to help your kid. You don't give up on them, you know. So they are finding a way outside of allopathic medicine to recover their children.
Excellent. So you are now the president of Health Freedom Ohio, a really great organization, by the way. And for those viewing this video, you'll find more information and links through to Health Freedom Ohio's website below the viewer on this page. So now tell us how you came to establish Health Freedom Ohio.
Sure. So I believe it was in 2016. It was the first time the state attempted to interfere with our parental rights when it comes to vaccinations. They wanted to insert a medical doctor in between our ability to use our reason of conscience, including our religious conviction exemption to vaccines, which, by the way, in the state of Ohio, we can exempt our children from vaccinations and send them to school. We have medical exemptions, and we have reason of conscience, which is philosophical, and we also have religious exemptions to that process. But they wanted to insert a medical doctor into that conversation, and I didn't understand it because I would not go to my religious leader for medical advice. I don't know why I would be expected to go to a medical doctor to receive confirmation on my beliefs. So it was very confusing bill that had been introduced, and at that moment I decided I wasn't going to allow it. You know, my children weren't going to be sold out to the pharmaceutical industry, and they weren't going to force me to see a medical doctor who, by the way, had fired me as a client. I consider that bullying, and I wasn't going to be forced into my abuser's office in order to ask for permission to exempt my child from a pharmaceutical product to begin with. So I started going downtown. It was the first time that I met with my House of Representative. And it was very nerve-wracking because just navigating downtown Columbus, figuring out where to park, and then going through the whole process of the Vern Rife building and trying to figure out the offices. I mean, it's just a very intimidating experience. And because I had been fired from the pediatrician, I didn't know how the conversation was going to go. I knew that it was more vitreous than I had realized it was, and I wasn't sure how my representative was going to take me, but it turned out that she was amazing. She was very supportive. She was uplifting. She really worked me through the process and encouraged me to continue coming back and to have this conversation with more and more of the representatives and the senators. And that really was a beginning for me with the political process. And leading into the establishment of Health Freedom Ohio was being downtown as a citizen, advocating for what I believed in. I realized that the medical trade organizations and the pharmaceutical companies are down there with their lobbyists 24/7 in our legislators' ears. And I thought, oh, wow, the natural health voice has no voice down here at all. Like, they are not hearing from the people. People are so divorced from the process. They don't even know what's going on out here, and I thought, this can't be, this is terrible. So we formed Health Freedom Ohio with the purpose of organizing ourselves as citizens who believe in natural health and who believe in the ability to make decisions for ourselves and our family. And yes, vaccinations is part of it, but it's just so much bigger than that as well. That we founded Health Freedom Ohio in 2019 as a means of being able to pool our resources. So I looked at some of the other medical trade organizations and their structure and saw that they had memberships, and those memberships were how they financed the organization, paid for the lobbyists, printed up educational materials. And I thought, if they can do it, we can do that as well, as citizens united under a banner of health freedom. That's totally tangible. We can do that. And I am happy to say that we have enough supporters now that we do have our first lobbyist. So we have professional representation downtown. And that doesn't mean that we stop as individuals from going down there and continuing to educate on our own behalves. But that means that we now have professional representation who can help assist us in the process of, because politics is tricky, right? So that was the foundation of Health Freedom Ohio. And I also want to say that those of us that founded the organization, we never wanted the organization to be the primary focus. It was always in the back seat. We wanted the people of the movement and their stories to be in the front seat, whether it was that they have always used natural health products, or if they had a recovery story where they found healing and health recovery outside of the allopathic system, and just helping them to tell their stories and to encourage them to also show up and to help educate the legislature on how they stay well and how they navigated from chronic disease to robust health by leaving and walking away from the allopathic field. I mean, it's incredibly important that we start doing that, more and more and more of us, so they start to hear, these messages that are outside of the constant medical trade organizations, our lobbyists, with their sound bites, right? We all probably know their sound bites by heart at this point.
Yeah, this is deep brainwashing.
Yes. And the representatives appreciate it. I think one of the best compliments that we ever got was from one of the representatives, and they said that they were just completely blown away by the quality of information that we had provided. And they said that they now recognized the lobbyist sound bites. And hearing from real people, and I don't mean to say that lobbyists aren't real people, of course they are, but they're not there to advocate on their own behalf. They're getting paid to sell the products and services of their employers. That's why they're there. And, they're hearing from real people and who are using these products, who are having these experiences, who are saying, hey, these sound bites aren't accurate. They're not actually representative of what our experience has been. This has been our experience. Here's the scientific evidence that supports what happened to us and why. And now I'm going to tell you how we recovered from that situation. So I don't know, it's just, it's been an incredible journey. If you told me 4 years ago that I was going to be in politics, I would have just thought that was the funniest thing I ever heard of. But here I am. And I don't want to be doing this, Kedarji. It's out of necessity, and the primary is because of my children. I want them to be able to have the same freedom that I experienced. I want to help protect and preserve that. I don't want them to be forced into a healthcare system outside of their own free will. I want them to be able to make those decisions on their own.
So important, and you just shared something that I also share, because I'm in this fight circuitously, because the only thing, I'm a monk in a long lineage of spiritual leaders and teachers, and all I wanted to do ever was just to continue their work by starting my school for meditation for well-being. And now I find myself in a cause that's much bigger than here we are, but for the long term, I think. Thank you so much. This has been so insightful, so very, very important. Before we close the interview, can you give us one takeaway message that you want our viewers to really remember from this interview?
Sure. Primarily, I want people to know, if they're struggling with their own health, and you feel like you're stuck and the doctors aren't giving you the answers. Sometimes we have to be able to go inside and listen to and trust our own intuition and figure out what's going to work for us. And a lot of times that means walking away from the system that's not working for you, and also giving up the things that are making you sick. So I just encourage everyone to realize that their body already holds the power to heal. And it's just a matter of navigating and going inside and listening to your intuition as to what is the correct path for you on your healing recovery. As far as the tumultuous waters we find ourselves in with the looming threat of forced COVID vaccines and forced compliance with masks and all of these things, I would just encourage you to get to know the representative voices in your community on every level, whether it's city council, whether it's the county commissioners, your sheriff, your House of Representatives for the state or the Senate, and even your Congress people. I just encourage you to start getting involved in that process and becoming active voters. And if you're interested in getting involved with Health Freedom Ohio, we have really helped to bring up support and give people the power to show up downtown and to testify for bills, and just really help people understand the process so they can stand there in confidence knowing that they're not alone. If you're interested in getting involved in the organization, you can find us at healthfreedomohio.org. And if you're interested in financial support, if you want to help us pay for our lobbyists, we would greatly appreciate that. He's doing incredible work for us and on our behalf. But most importantly, I think it's important for you to stay engaged and involved in the process, whether it's occupying your own health or occupying your own representatives. We definitely need to be involved in that process.
Thank you so much for that. And I second your comments. Just so our viewers understand, community health freedom in Mahoning County is establishing an ongoing collaboration with Health Freedom Ohio that we really want to see grow and flourish, because they're an incredible organization. They've taken up everything that needs to be focused on for health freedom in the true context of that word. So again, below this viewer, you will see information about Health Freedom Ohio and a link through to their website. You'll also find information on community health freedom. I am Kedarji, a community supporter of community health freedom. We've been talking to Michelle Cotterman, who is a nurse, who is a health freedom advocate and advocate for bodily autonomy, and a really a great human being. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on to this interview, Michelle. Thanks again.
Thank you, Kedarji, and I appreciate you and Community Health Freedom. And we're also excited and looking forward to the collaboration and to watch how we can grow as two organizations who are dedicated to preserving health freedom in the state of Ohio and beyond.
And beyond, for sure. Thanks so much, Michelle.